Your seats, please. Okay, members, we are at item number 9, which is kind of generically the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, but Mr. Stevens, why don't you kick off this discussion? Shh, everybody, hey, you two. Okay, this is deep, important, complex, legal stuff.
Well, you know that's not the
case.
Yeah,
just to sober everybody up. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Stevens.
Well, first and foremost, is the air conditioning okay now?
Yes, it's much better. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, icicles on my toes. Yes.
Well, apparently what happens is it gets turned off during most of the meeting because it interferes with our simulcast, or at least that was the report over lunch from strange people who were standing here who I did not recognize. I do not know if that's true or not. No, it's not true, says our sound technicians. So we have the option of freezing during the entire meeting or not, as you see fit. Okay. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'd like to start by saying that we're not the star of the show. So the panelists that I have assembled here gratefully accepted the invitation to appear before you. But we're really a preview for the representative from BDCP that's going to update us on what's going on. So just at the outset, I want you to know that we're just kind of laying the groundwork. And by laying the groundwork, what I'd like to say is that I hope to reiterate or refresh in your memories why BDCP is relevant to this council.
You want us to remember what you're about to tell us and what you previously told us? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, actually we did. We made efforts in the past, probably on several occasions, to talk about BDCP, but it's always been in the abstract, and it's always been with regard to the statute. We'll go into the details again, but now that we do have announcements by the state and federal governments about the enhanced, revised BDCP going forward, we thought that it was timely to do a little refresher. And again, it's to point out why BDCP, other than the general interest in what could be the state's greatest or at least biggest attempt at fixing the water supply and ecosystem problems, other than that general interest.
Other than a purient interest.
Right, why it's relevant to you. And I've pointed out a couple times that you actually do have some roles, as we've talked about, that are laid out in the Delta Reform Act. So I thought with your prompting that it was time to revisit that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the members on my little panel that I've assembled here that are fantastic for agreeing to sit with me. First, your intern, Tori Sundheim, who has
returned from vacation.
She not only from vacation, but you'll recall she was our summer intern, and she was foolish enough to come back for this latest session. She's finishing up at McGeorge Law School, and did just an outstanding job for us. A real quick study. Produced a lot of work, which was really helpful to me. So in any event, I tasked her with organizing me for this presentation, and she's done the lion's share of work. So I give her the credit for putting this together just at the outset, and all the criticism should go to me if there are inaccuracies. Right. Tori did a fantastic job, one of which was to try to bring me into the modern world by suggesting that I try PowerPoint. I know that you don't really like PowerPoint.
I don't.
And so
but you did it anyway.
Well, I did just because I wanted to try it. So Tori said, "Yeah, this is how people do things now." We settled on, I think, 8 or 9 slides, very general slides.
Have you included any of your own artistic work in the slides?
No comment on that. So, and then over to my further left, a real honor to have presenting before you Tara Mueller from the Office of Attorney General, the Oakland office. Tara is one of the state's renowned experts on environmental law, Endangered Species Act, CEQA, NEPA. She is the one to go to with regard to all these issues. She's involved in all of the big states' water cases She works a lot with. Well, it's not. And in fact, she's the author of a memo that we've attached once again to your
The May
staff
2010 memo that you prepared.
yeah,
for us.
and she was tasked with a real challenge because at the time we were just starting up, and so we were trying to make heads or tails of the statute and how we were supposed to fit into the whole BDCP Delta Plan regime that the legislature had laid out for us. So Tara has graciously agreed to come up here, and she's actually going to provide the guts of the technical information. And what I'd like to do is keep it very general, laypersons, broad brush, but at the same time, I want you to know that we've got the real expert here. She's prepared some supplemental handouts that hopefully you have, and she's going to go through those at the appropriate time in the level of detail that I think that you want. So we're going to look to you for prompts as to whether or not we are providing too much detail, just the right amount of detail. But in a nutshell, the processes that we're going to lay out for you are those. They're processes. But at the same time, behind those processes are real substantive issues.
But this is not the occasion for asking or answering the question, does the current configuration of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan meet the requirements of law?
I would hope not. And Tara had agreed to show up here if
with the understanding that would not be asked.
And I said the chair would never ask something.
No, I think that's important because this stage of the process is a refresher again, and it is complicated on the statutory authorities, the statutory requirements, the direction to the council, our own actions we took in adopting the council rules and appeal provisions that apply to our potential consideration of a part of the BDCP. So just members, I think they're not prepared and would not be anxious to answer questions saying, are they really wrong when they say this on page 476? That's not the purpose of this part of the hearing.
Absolutely not the purpose. And to keep in mind, as the representative from BDCP will probably explain, is
yes, Ms. Namath is here.
Ms. Namath is here. Oh, hi. They're in the formative stages of this project.
Formative stages.
I think
it started in 2006. It's somewhat further advanced than formative.
Further advanced than formative. They're nearing the end. But in any event, it's definitely not our purpose here to talk about that. Again, we're going to lay out what the council's roles are, just as a refresher. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tori just to go through the first slide, which is
the Sondheim. Pull that microphone very close to you when you speak so we can hear you and the audience on television. Put it on top of your paper, please.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So this presentation, again, is on the Bay Delta's Conservation Plan. It's a refresher on the requirements for incorporation into the Delta Plan and the Council's roles and responsibilities. What we'll be going over first is just an overview of the BDCP and how it's different from the Delta Plan. Next, we'll talk about Water Code Section 85.320 and the requirements for incorporation into the Delta Plan. We'll talk about the Council's possible appellate role, other Council roles and responsibilities, and then issues for future consideration. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tara.
Chris.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. So when we start with the BDCP and the Delta Plan, overview of the BDCP, I'm not going to provide the typical overview of the BDCP. I'm going to leave that to Ms. Namath when she comes up here because I'm certain to get things wrong, and I know things have shifted since the last time that we focused. But what I'm going to do is kind of follow, if you turn to your staff report, agenda item 9, just a couple of points that I'd like to raise. First of all, the first paragraph talks about what BDCP is intended to provide. Provide for the conservation of threatened and endangered fish species in the Delta, amongst others, and improve the reliability of the water supply system within a stable regulatory framework. So in a nutshell, and in fact the BDCP webpage is great, and it's got some real good information in layperson's terms, but I found one thing that was very helpful. It said the purpose of the plan is regulatory in nature. In the most basic sense, the BDCP provides a regulatory vehicle for project proponents to agree to implement a suite of habitat restoration measures, other stressor reduction activities, and water operations criteria in return for regulatory agency approval of the necessary long-term ESA permits for the water projects and water operations to proceed. And then it goes on to say that the implementation of the plan will occur over a 50-year time frame and includes other very valuable information. But I think the kernel of information here that we've got to keep in mind is BDCP is really intended to come up with a stable regulatory regime for the water operations in the context of a larger conservation plan. We haven't had a stable regulatory regime for some time. In fact, coming at part of the CalFed process, one of the goals and objectives was to reduce the amount of conflict in the Delta, to lessen the number of Delta lawsuits and litigation. As we've reported in the past, not only to Delta Vision, but here, the continuing saga of the Delta Smelt litigation, the Delta Salmonid litigation, and a myriad of other Delta-related cases that are pending and that will probably continue. In fact, Judge Wanger, the famous Judge Wanger, in some of his real important smelt and salmon cases, admonished the state and federal government to come up with a solution, to come up with a plan to establish a stable regulatory regime. BDCP is, if successful, will be that vehicle. The seeds of it were formed actually prior to 2006 with your esteemed executive officer who had the foresight to try to pull people together coming out of the CalFed process to talk about the need for regulatory assurances in the context of funded conservation measures, and that kind of morphed into the greater BDCP effort that now has attracted, the best and brightest minds from all over. A lot of time and effort, and without getting into the details, though, I just want you to know that it did start in earnest in 2006. So as you say, it's not exactly the formative stages, but we appear now with the recent press release by the governor and the Obama administration to be on the verge of undergoing an enhanced or revised process. And so I think that's what the excitement and the interest is all about here, and that's what's kind of spurred our refresher, so to speak. I've attached to the staff report a copy of that press release. You probably have read it already. It goes in depth about not in depth, but it touches on some of the general points that the state and federal administrations see as likely components to a plan that will be successful. In response to that, Chair Eisenberg sent out his own media advisory in reaction to the press release that I've also taken the liberty of attaching to the staff report. And that has some interesting points that I don't know if you want to touch upon that later in your comments, but it was important because it was not only one grumpy old water guy's reactions, but I think it did touch upon some of the real changes that you saw and that I've heard that others have noted with regard at least to the announcement. The announcement was, I think, preceded a few days before by a 50 or so page document that was a working draft.
Which is also in the...
Which is attached as well for your information, a working draft of recommendations by the state and federal principals, I believe to their bosses. Ultimately, those components will change, but they were ideas, again, of what they thought would be the pieces of a successful BDCP that also included some detailed information on what the governance structure, at least at this point, might look like. There were permit governing structures, water operations groups, a stakeholder group, with a list of potential agency invitees, one of which was this council. So it's worth a read. Again, it was a working draft, and it's attached to the staff report. So in light of that, I think that it's important to note that the BDCP, at least in the announcement, the BDCP folks have said that over the course of the next 90 days, they're going to be meeting to flesh out some more of these details. In fact, I believe that there's a meeting at the end of this month, which will be the next in a series of forums to work on these things. But at least one point that I want to raise, the BDCP is the plan, is the conservation plan, and it's important because when we talk about the different roles that this council has, one of the roles in particular has to do with the formation of the plan itself. The BDCP is going to undergo and is already undergoing extensive environmental review through the CEQA-NEPA process. So the BDCP itself, the conservation plan, will have its own and does have its own EIS, EIR. That's important to point out that there are two separate, similar to what we're doing here with the Delta Plan and the EIR on the Delta Plan. There are roles with regard to the BDCP, EIR, EIS for this council, but it's at the outset I think it's important to distinguish between the two, obviously interrelated. But finally, I'd like to touch upon, without going into great detail, the difference just from a very superficial level about the BDCP and the Delta Plan. You know, we get not only press inquiries, telephone calls, stakeholder comments, you get public comments in your meetings. Still, when people come up and have try to engage in discussions on the size of a tunnel or a canal, or talk about capacity of intakes, or what the conveyance mapping will look like, or what the appropriate level of mitigation or conservation measures should look like with regard to BDCP. And we have a heck of a time trying to distinguish between all of the processes. The Delta Plan is separate from BDCP, although, as we'll go into and we've talked about before, there is a potential interrelationship. I think, Chair Eisenberg, as you said in your press announcement, referring to a colleague that you had talked to about the differences, you said the Delta Plan is the comprehensive resources management plan for the Delta that the legislature mandated. The BDCP, in effect, if it's successful, will be the plumbing for that plan. And that's something that we have to continually remind ourselves, but remind stakeholders, members of the press. You know, it's not only a communications matter, but these are two separate processes in addition to all the other things that are going on. For instance, the State Board, as you know, is undergoing an update of the Bay Delta, the Basin Plan, but we get comments on, you know, how is the Delta Plan different from the Bay Delta Plan, and how is that different from the BDCP? So just at a very superficial level, again, the comprehensive resource management plan that we're on the verge of adopting here shortly, different than the actual plumbing, the regulatory regime that hopefully will be successful and incorporated into our plan and then become the basis for consistency determinations in the future through the rubric of the Delta Plan. So with that, I'd ask, are there any questions at the outset before I jump into specifics in terms of the roles of the council?
It would be facetious to say, what's it mean, Alfie? But
Yeah.
I'm tempted.
Sir.
I have one question. We're kind of, at least I'm sitting in kind of an awkward spot, and I know you spent a lot of time working on your PowerPoint.
He cannot easily see the slide stuff.
So do you have any paper copies?
It's a-
Hard copy of your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I
in
believe it's
in your
attached.
packet, agenda item tab
Well, I've got
9.
Tara's, but I did. Did you do a separate one that's not included in the packet?
It should be included in the
Included in there,
packet,
okay.
and I'll get you a copy.
We have,
No, if it's already in there, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want to miss the opportunity of having a copy of your first PowerPoint, because if you go on to become a star in the field, it could prove very valuable.
Thank you for that.
did you mean an autograph copy, Mr.?
Okay. So can we go to the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question, Pat?
Maybe somebody with an extra copy of the table.
Yeah. Is there an extra copy, Pat, or Cindy? Oh.
Yeah, I don't have this one.
The PowerPoint presentation, they will,
Yeah.
yep. Two shades, two-tone blue plus
Just-
black.
Just to help you out, the PowerPoint slides are really just a guide for telling you what we're talking about. So-
Well, but there are a lot of acronyms that play off against each other in this discussion, and I still find it difficult, even though I reread Ms. Mueller's memo of 2010 all over again, to keep them straight. Okay.
So with
Proceed.
that, I'm going to ask that we go to the next slide. In